Good morning, everybody. Sunday, April 26, 2020. Welcome to all of you. Seems people enjoy some of the little historical vignettes I do. And today I've got a doozy for you. The killer of Lincoln's killer. How's that? One of the strangest guys you'd ever want to meet in history. I'm not going to get down too much into the details. We know President Lincoln was assassinated on April 14th of 1865 in Washington, D.C., and it set off a huge manhunt, ultimately ending with Booth and Herod, another one of the co-conspirators, being surrounded in a barn in Port Royal, Virginia. They were told to come out by the New York regiments. They refused, and Booth wanted to have a duel to fight for his freedom. Ultimately, Herod walked out. Booth let him leave, calling him a coward. And they started to get impatient. It was about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. So the New York regiment thought, let's set fire to the barn. And as they set fire to the barn, they could see through the cracks in the siding on the barn. They could see Booth in there, and a guy named Boston Corbett, who was part of that regiment, told the court of inquiry later that he saw Booth start to raise his gun as if he was going to shoot to the outside of the barn and maybe kill a few of the Union troops that were there. So Boston Corbett, raised his gun, took a shot, and split Booth's spinal cord. Booth dropped to the ground, and he lingered for a few hours, and he ended up being paralyzed and dying in the morning. His last words, he asked some of the federal troops to raise his arms up, and his last words were useless. Useless, I guess, having discovered that he was paralyzed. Well, he probably went to his grave disappointed that he wasn't the hero he thought he would be. In those days between April 14th of 1865 and his capture date on April 26th of 1865, he got a few newspapers along the way, and he was horrified to see that in the South, Lincoln's death was being mourned in a lot of places down there. That was unbelievable to him. He thought he would be hailed as a hero. And it probably dawned on him in his last hours, surrounded by troops in that barn in Virginia, that he had made a pretty bad miscalculation about what a hero he would be. He also cost this country and the South a great deal of pain under Reconstruction with President Andrew Johnson, who was probably arguably the worst president in U.S. history. But let's focus now, having set the stage a little bit, on the guy who fired that shot, Boston Corbett. He was somewhat of a Jesus freak. He was a hat maker. He was born in England, came over, went into the hat trade, the hatting trade. And when the Civil War came along, he was enlisted in the New York regiments, and it seems he really enjoyed that. Although he got captured down south one time by a group called Mosby's Raiders, some really bad guys. Think of like the Hells Angels of the Civil War. That was the Southern Mosby's Raiders. They didn't take, they didn't leave anybody behind or anything that wasn't burned up in their wake. They were really tough. Well, before Corbett was captured, his whole group had started to retreat behind him under fire, the rest of his regiment. And some of them were killed, of course. And Corbett stood his ground and continued firing away. And when he was captured, Mosby's Raider says, we got to hang this guy or do away with this guy, man. This guy is like a menace. And Mosby's like, no. This guy was the only guy that had any guts to stand there and keep firing away at the end, to send this guy off to Andersonville prison, that notorious prison down south, whereupon he escaped from that hellhole, made his way back north, picked up his arms again, went back into battle, was captured again, and finally, a little bit before Lincoln's assassination, he was paroled or released back to the north on one of the many prisoner exchanges. Well, he was assigned that duty to go track down Lincoln's killer, and as I said, he was the one that fired the shot that killed booth in the barn. But as I said, he was something of a Jesus freak too, and he was a real strange guy. Okay, and the way he would be a street corner preacher, he ended up eventually in Kansas and has a baptism certificate that survives today, being born again. But the strangest thing that he did was in 1858, he encountered a group of prostitutes, I guess on the streets of New York. And I guess they were very fancy and very nice looking gals. And he found a little bit of a stirring in his loins. And because he was a religious guy, he felt bad about having this reaction and seeing these women. And of course, the Bible says, if your eyes offend you, then pluck them out. So, strangely enough, he went back to his house. He grabbed his shears that he used in hat making. He took his pants down. He lifted up his scrotum, and he cut an incision in the bottom of his scrotum sac, pulled his 2 testes out and cut them off, and did a job of sewing himself up. Went out, had a few drinks, had some dinner, had a little bit of a walkabout around town before he finally sought medical attention. I mean, you want to talk about a religious zealot. He would talk back to commanding officers that would tell him to do something, and Corbett, and he would say, "Sir, it's Sunday. This is the day the Lord has do it, Corbett." And he would say, "You're breaking God's law." I might be breaking it. Finally, just, okay, shut up, or whatever. I mean, he was really a religious zealot. Well, when the war ended, he tried to go back to hat making. He eventually ended up going off to Kansas. He became Stanton, the Secretary of War, wanted to try him at first, because Stanton, the war secretary who led who directed the group searching for Booth, said, "Do not kill this guy, take him alive." And he was distressed, as a lot of the high command was, because it was going to deprive the generals of their ability to have their their military tribunal and try Booth. Well, eventually Stanton changed his tune, thought, I might as well go with the times. This guy's a hero. He ended up going out to Kansas and serving as one of the sergeants of arms in the Kansas legislature, until he went crazy one time and thought that some other people in the sergeants of arm corps there were speaking badly of him, and he pulled out a gun and started threatening people on the floor of the Kansas State House. Well, that was no good. They ended up committing him to an insane asylum, okay? And then he eventually escaped from that. Had a little dugout just a little bit north of I-70 in a place called Concordia, Kansas. And they eventually left there and told people he was going to go to Mexico. And you know what? He was never seen again. Some people thought he went off to Minnesota. I believe in 1894, there was a terrible fire in Minnesota that took a lot of lives, and they thought he perished in that. But you have to say one thing. The killer of Lincoln's killer was certainly a colorful guy in himself, Boston Corbett. And as Paul Harvey would say, now you know the rest of the story. Your thumbs up are appreciated. If you enjoyed these little vignettes, leave a comment in the comment box below. And thanks so much for watching on this 155th anniversary of the capture and death of Lincoln's assassin, John Wilkes Booth. Thanks, everyone.